Hi, I'm Saw from Rock the Vote, and today we're interviewing Dillan Horton, who's running for District 2. Dylan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm glad to at least share virtually this conversation with y'all. My name is Dillan Horton. I'm a candidate for Davis City Council in the second district. I, like many people, came to Davis as a UC Davis student a number of years ago. Majored in political science. I'm currently the chair of the Davis Police Accountability Commission. So, looking forward to our questions and conversation today.
All right, so Mr. Horton, what makes you the best candidate for District 2?
Well, I think, given the issues that we're facing right now, particularly right here in Davis, but across our country right now, we need more leaders in elected office with some of the backgrounds and experiences, both lived and professional, that I would bring to the city council. Obviously, we've seen, on our cell phones and computers and TVs over this summer, so many incidents of police brutality and issues and incidents that bring forward in our conversation our issues and history with race in this country. And I think we need leaders who are really focused on diving into those issues and really addressing them at from a seat in government. I think also our housing crisis that we've been living with here in Davis for many years, our economic crisis, sort of affecting job opportunities and economic opportunity in our community. Those are things that are affecting our community really in a harsh way for some of our underrepresented populations. And I think we need advocates that are going to fight hard for them at the city council. And that's why I think my candidacy is really important. And that's why I'm hoping folks vote for me on November 3rd.
Yeah, so you've mentioned you're president of the Police Accountability Commission. So as well, I guess, as you're also a member of, a lot of other local groups, how does your background make you a qualified candidate or someone that's better suited to serve the Davis community?
Well, I mentioned, that we're a community in the middle of a housing crisis. Half of our town is renters. More than half of our town is renters, actually. And we don't have, out of our 5 city council members, not one of them is a renter currently. We actually haven't had a renter on the city council, elected to the city council in almost 15 years. And so that representation is really lacking. And I think that shows up in how our city government addresses housing policy, addresses things that are related to renters. I think some of those things, as and I'm not trying to suggest that our council members aren't trying hard, but when these aren't your lived experiences, sometimes these issues get put on the back burner. And I think that that's something that we need to get working in the right direction. And I think that only can be achieved by electing renters to the Davis City Council. Also, you mentioned the Police Accountability Commission. Um, my I'm really glad to have the experience over the past 2 years serving on the Police Accountability Commission as vice chair in the first year, and then now as chair. And it's given me sort of a behind the curtain look at how the city government works with staff, how the relationship between staff and council works at times, and how you take something from a starting point of being an idea, or just a community concern or something that folks are trying to get into, sort of change up some of how things are going in our city government, and take that all the way to an ordinance or a program, and being able to watch sort of the development of policy in the city, to be able to suggest things at time that were taken up and welcomed by the city, and to suggest some other things that hadn't been as successful. It's really been a great learning experience. And I think I would bring that that sort of heightened awareness of how to achieve what I'm looking to get done in the city government. I think that would really help me sort of hit the ground running. And so that lived experience, both as a renter and that sort of experience with the city as a commission member in general, but now as a commission chair, I think would be really helpful to me being able to advocate for people who for too long, I think, have gone without strong advocacy and representation in the city, and that, being people of color and renters.
So now let's talk about some local issues. One of which on the ballot is Measure B. Being from District 2, your district may not directly be impacted by traffic or environmental impacts, But are you a supporter of Measure B?
So, we're a town of 70,000 people. We're a town, yeah, that is easily walkable. I'm a little sweaty because I just came back from walking from downtown. So nothing, even if it's not directly touching a district, nothing, no part of Davis would be immune from the effects of a project like Measure B if it passed. On the ballot that I turned in to our ballot drop box a couple of weeks ago, I voted yes on Measure B. And, you know, with each of these projects that come before us as voters, with each of the projects that come before the council, you have, sort of the task of government is to balance interests. You have a number of different, groups of people, a number of different needs that need to be addressed, and sort of really one decision that you're going to make. We need to, as I said before, think critically and long term in our city about how we create economic opportunity for people in this community. I mentioned that I, came, into this community as a UC Davis student. So many people graduate from UC Davis each year, leave our community, and there's a proportion of people who are going to do that no matter what. They came here for school and they weren't really imagining an adult life for themselves here, and that's a natural occurrence. But there's some people that are essentially pushed out of our community, people who come to our town as UC Davis students, pick up knowledge and maybe pick up some affinity and liking for our community. And then when they look around as a senior or someone who just graduated and try to put together an idea of a career or a full adult life for themselves in this community, they find that that's really a rough road to ride down, or fully impossible. And so they leave and find economic and career opportunities in communities like Sacramento or the Bay Area because they aren't available to them here. And if we want a community with a social and economic future, we're really going to have to concentrate on creating those economic opportunities. And I think some of that lies in what could be available if Measure B passes. And then also on the other side of this, the housing crisis is my biggest concern. It was when I launched my campaign more than a year ago, and it still remains my biggest concern. And this, while I think we should always be skeptical of some of the promises given to us by developers in these big projects, we've been sort of burned before in Davis in projects like the Cannery and other large housing projects, which we're told are going to be, really big expansions of, some things like workforce housing or, below market rate housing or affordable housing, and then don't really materialize as being that. And so I think, like I said, we should be skeptical of some of the promises of these developers. But as it stands, as proposed, as moved through the city council and as before the voters, Measure B would drastically expand the stock of affordable housing in Davis. That's a critical need in our community right now. My sort of day job is I work supporting people with developmental disabilities, really to find employment and just to integrate to the community as much as possible. And so many of my clients, struggle finding and maintaining quality affordable housing, and that's the only way to really address that is just to expand the stock of housing overall. And it's a numbers game, a supply game to a certain extent, but also we have to very seriously look at expanding, subsidized affordable housing in Davis so that lower income people, people whose life is structured in sort of a lower income dynamic can find quality affordable housing. So yeah, that's a very long answer. I apologize, but yeah, I voted yes on Measure B.
All right, so now I'm actually going to move on to police reform. As we've seen this summer, there have been a lot of incidents happening throughout our country that have sparked the conversation about police reform. Do you think that the Davis Police Department needs more accountability and transparency? And if so, what changes would you propose to the police department?
So yeah, I think this is surprisingly one of the biggest distinguishing sort of characteristics between myself and my opponents, and I really didn't expect that in this race. My vision here is informed in part by my experience. So as I just said, a couple of minutes ago, and over the past 2 years on the Police Accountability Commission, being able to hear from individuals in our community who've had struggles and problems interacting with our system of policing, and also to be able to work with and hear from police leaders themselves, from other city leaders who have some different perspectives on these things. So my sort of vision for how we can move forward here is in part informed by that experience, but also in part informed by my lived experience as a person who's been pulled over a number of times by Davis police officers. Some of these things are too coincidental. They seem like they're out of some sort of sitcom, but I was driving home from one of the city council meetings a number of years ago when they were creating the Police Accountability Commission that I would later be appointed to, and I was pulled over by the police driving home from that city council meeting. And so I know from an analytical sort of government perspective and from a personal perspective that there is troubling and widespread bias in how the Davis Police Department interacts with its residents and with people who are just out and about in Davis. And just a quick example of this. The RIPA data, racial, oh goodness, so many acronyms, but the racial profiling data for the Davis Police Department for the last for the last year was released to the public and presented to the Police Accountability Commission just earlier this summer. And goodness, looking at, those numbers compared to just our population here in Davis, our sort of demographics are, more than 60% of Davis residents are white. And the sort of proportion of people who had been stopped, sort of detained and arrested by the Davis Police Department was around, of white people was around 50%, a little bit above 50%. So fully less than 10%, of the white population was being sort of interacting with the police than relative to their population. The African-American population is somewhere around 2.4%, really, really low, in compared to even other communities in Northern California. And the proportion of African Americans, detained and arrested by the Davis Police Department in the last year was somewhere around 9%. So more than triple the proportion. And so that's just sort of one example of how, again, there is widespread and really troubling examples of racial and ethnic bias in how the police department operates. So where do we go from here? This bias, it's important for us to understand that this bias can't really be trained out of our police department. Over the past few decades, or I shouldn't say, over the past couple of years, we have focused on things that you would think of from an activist perspective as police reform issues. Things like diversifying police departments, intensive implicit bias training, de-escalation training. And these are things that we've tried, basically over the length of my lifetime to try to make police departments less brutal and less racially biased. The unfortunate thing is that over these, 2.5, 3 decades or so, these efforts, while positive, haven't really made the impact that we need them to, that we expected them to have at this point. We've tried to employ all of these things, and yet these racial biases are still present in how the police department operates. So if we can't train it out of the police department, if we can't diversify it out of the police department, we need to look at real significant changes in structure to be able to move forward with this. And that's why many activists in our community, and myself included, have focused over this summer in separating these things that we would traditionally think of as nonviolent social services from armed law enforcement. So we don't want these services to be delivered at the hands of an armed law enforcement professional, but we also, I think, should consider separating these services out from the administration of the police department entirely. And what kind of things are we talking about here? We're talking about response to mental health crises. We know from hearing from police officers that they feel ill-equipped to be responding to a lot of these calls. And we had the incident in North Davis just last December where an individual, murdered someone, murdered a member of their family, and then took their own life after police officers responded. So it's clear that this is not the best way for us to handle this. So we need to make sure that trained mental health professionals are the people who are responding to these incidents, and that we probably don't want those people to be on the payroll of the police department. This means separating things like response to substance abuse issues, individuals who are homeless. And I think we should really seriously, and this is somewhat radical, so brace yourself. I hope you're sitting well in your chair. But we also should consider separating traffic enforcement from the police department as well. I know, again, from my own lived experience, and I know from having heard from a lot of the folks of color who live in Davis who've had these troubling experiences with the police department, these pullovers or these stops in traffic in the car are some of the most, high frequency examples of this bias. And you can imagine how that's happening. The information that you have as a police officer is visual at this point. You're sort of looking at the car, you're looking at the person. And I definitely know of situations where I feel like the cop sort of looked at me and saw the skin color of my face and made a decision about whether or not to pull me over after that. So we need to think about how we can take those four things, mental health, drug abuse, homelessness, and traffic enforcement, and separating those out into the police department. That means putting them in an existing, some of those services in an existing already separate police department. You could imagine putting maybe, I don't know, maybe some of the drug support or mental health response stuff in fire, maybe, because they do a lot of sort of healthcare related public safety stuff. In the area of traffic enforcement, I know some cities like Berkeley are considering putting traffic enforcement in public works, in the public works department in their city. Some folks here in Davis don't really like that idea, but that's something to sort of consider as far as where we land these services, maybe in an existing separated department. We can put these in a brand new department that we create. Some folks have talked about creating this sort of Department of Public Safety that we sort of pick up and drop off some of these services into. And then particularly as we are looking at response to mental health crises, we're probably going to need to work with the county and some of our neighboring cities like Woodland, Westsack, and Winters to form a joint powers authority so that we can work together to deliver those services across Yolo County. So there's a lot of things, but to the short answer to your question, yes, we definitely need to inject more accountability and transparency into the Davis Police Department. And I think that starts fundamentally with separating these services from the administration of the PD.
All right. So you mentioned that Davis, the demographic of Davis is more than 60% of white people. In a university town where we see more and more diversification within the university, within our community, but we don't see it in our local government, in our city. We don't see it in the candidates. We don't see it in people that are in charge in the police department. What steps will you take to help minority and marginalized communities, especially in a town that is very much white?
Yeah, this is an important question because I got a version of this question. I don't know if you have seen any of the candidate forums prior to now, but I got a version of this question at the League of Women Voters forum a couple of weeks ago. And a couple of things I think are important to focus on here. Number one, well, obviously you can elect people of color to elected offices. I think that would sort of be just sort of a little crumb in helping start there. I had someone else mention to me that I was the only person of color running for Davis City Council this year, and I didn't know until someone brought it up to me. Because I think part of that is just you're as a person of color just sort of used to operating in these spaces where you are the only person who identifies in that way. I think individuals on the city councils and on these elected boards, regardless of their ethnicity, should consider how they can focus on diversity in their commission appointments. County boards of supervisors have these countywide commissions where they can appoint individuals in their districts. The city council has, the ability to appoint residents from across the city to assist in the city's work. We have more commissions than many other cities that's this size. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to appoint people to the Tree Commission and the Police Accountability Commission and the Planning Commission. And I think also our city council has to take steps to prioritize diversity in hiring for city staff. Now, the only person that the city council hires directly is the city manager, but I think it's important for the council to make it a sort of government-wide hiring priority for city management, that we are bringing in people, not just of diverse ethnic backgrounds, but of diverse sort of economic strata, diverse sort of gender identification. If I'm elected, I would also be Davis's first openly gay city council member. That's sort of a crazy thing to think about in 2020, when our city has been in existence for more than a century now. And so, yeah, we definitely need to have a city council where its members are concentrating on diversity in its commission appointment process, in its hiring, and definitely electing more individuals that represent the broad diversity of our community. Because when we pull from all parts of our community in creating our government, then our policy is better. Then our government functions better. Then our residents are more satisfied with the product that they end up getting from the government when they see themselves, not only like from a skin color perspective, but when they see their ideas and their concerns and their needs being reflected in the government, then everything gets better after that.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to youth. So statistics show that youth are the least active voting group in the nation when it comes to midterms, when it comes to general local elections. Why do you think that the youth are so hesitant to participate in the democracy?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, voting is, as you probably know, is a habitual activity. And so when it is a pattern for you, when it is something that you did, 2 years ago, and then 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, it's just easier to do it this time. And for a lot of young voters, it's the first couple of times that they voted, and so it's less ingrained of a pattern in how they live, and how they interact with the news and sort of digest information that's going on about the government. But also, the 21st century has been a hell of a time to have faith in government, right? I think about, why do so many, in the primary earlier this year, why do so many young people feel gravitated to this, radical septuagenarian democratic socialist from New England? Because the 21st century in the late 90s for my generation and just immediately after was just a real bummer in terms of faith in government and major institutions, faith in big business. We had, all of these folks drag us into unnecessary wars in the early 2000s. We had all these folks drag us into what at the time was America's worst economic contraction since the Great Depression, and then rob us blind trying to dig themselves out of the recession. We had them sort of for going on more than 4 decades, ignore a pending ecological and environmental crisis that seems to be, putting us on a countdown clock to the end of the, human habitable planet. So there are a lot of reasons for young people to see government as something that does not have a possibility of having a positive impact in their life. That makes sense from an intuitive level. And I think it's incumbent on, it's incumbent on folks like me who are running for office and trying to change some of these things as far as patterns that government and big business have gotten into. But it's also incumbent on the damn people in government who are, I don't know if I should say damn on a high school thing, but it's incumbent on the people who are already in government to give young voters or first-time voters a reason to have faith in government. When just earlier this summer, George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police officers on May 25th this year. So it was just right before the beginning of June and Pride Month and the budget process for the city. Sort of June is budget season in government. And the city was already in the midst of its sort of budget update for the next fiscal year. I and a number of community leaders and activists in the community organized what we called the March for Justice, which was way bigger than we thought it was going to be, number one, but led off from Central Park and marched through downtown to the Davis Police Department to try to organize, a community around a number of proposals for change, which, I just outlined to you earlier in the way of sort of separating these things out from the police department. But this just happened to be, 48 hours before the city's final budget meeting. The March for Justice was on the 14th. I guess the budget meeting was on the 16th of June. And we said, hey, everybody, y'all are trying to, wonder and figure out what you're going to do to be involved in this path toward justice over this summer. This meeting is just in a couple of days, and you can participate in it from your home. You don't even have to be wearing pants. And so we had, goodness, I don't even know how many people in terms of number, but 90 plus minutes of public comment on the budget item, telling the city council directly, almost verbatim, defund the police, focus on these social services, focus on mental health. And what I was hoping was going to happen, what I think a lot of people who came out to our march just 48 hours earlier were hoping was going to happen, is that the city council was going to recognize the moment in history that they were in, that they were going to recognize the need that was in the community to take at least not a full revolutionary step to reorder, how the government and public safety was organized in the city in that meeting, but to recognize the need in the community and to take a step forward in allocating its budget in a more progressive and fully public safety centered way. And they didn't do that. And I think it's actions like that that make people think, well, this voting thing doesn't matter. So that's sort of some of the reasons I see in why we have such low voter participation. Is just not a pattern for many young people, number one, and just for the people who might be even thinking about it, it just doesn't seem like a good idea. It doesn't seem like it's connected to making your life better. And in part, that's the fault of folks in leadership in our society who have made it that way.
Okay, so my last question. So I'm a senior in high school, and sometimes it feels like there's a really, really large gap between being a student and our local governments. I didn't even know who my mayor was until I think 2 weeks ago when I saw on a YouTube ad for Measure B. So if you're elected, how will you work to incorporate and inform the youth of Davis about any decisions you make as a city council?
Well, I think what people have been able to find out about me working in activism and in politics here locally over the past 5 or 6 years or so, is that I am a person who hungrily engages with people about the issues that are going on in the community. Just in the course of this campaign, I think people have a number of times just been thankful to just me directly or our campaign in general for trying to reach out to folks who are not normally reached out to and explain some of the things that are going on and solicit their input on these important issues that are going on in this city. I think part of that comes from my background in student government, which I don't know if you had participated in student government at all in high school, but goodness, trying to get your constituents to engage with you as a student government is not even, a quote unquote real government, is like pulling teeth. And so you really have to work hard as a leader in student government to try to engage with your constituents, to try to figure out what they need, to try to figure out how you can better represent them. And so I think that's a part of why I always will put the most effort into outreach, first, middle, and last. I'm also an elected party officer locally here in Yolo County, and that's another sort of place in leadership where a bunch of Democrats elected me, but most don't know my name. But a lot of people will know that they will see me at events all across the town, all across the county, frankly, before this election. Before I was sort of tied down to only being in Davis, you would see me in Westack and Winters and Woodland and all across this community trying to engage young people, trying to engage low income communities, trying to engage communities of color, because it's often the communities that are most in need of greater representation, greater advocacy, that are the least engaged in government. That includes young people, that includes so many groups of people in our community that need to have representatives fighting for them way more actively and way more consistently than they are right now. And I am looking forward to continuing the same level of public engagement and public outreach as I have in the campaign, as I have in my activism prior to now. And so that's how I think I'm going to continue to engage young people in these issues. I'm going to keep having roundtables. You're going to keep seeing me on Instagram. And that's, I think, a thing that we need to see a lot more of in government.
Yeah, so that was actually my last question. Thank you so much for the interview. Do you have any parting comments to anyone that may be watching this video?
Well, I mean, like I said before, I would just really encourage folks to figure out what's going on and demand that they be a part of it. I mentioned before that, I didn't mention before. One of the things I should have mentioned before is that for the youngest generation of voters, we have the most at stake in any election. The younger you are, the more you have at stake, because the life the life of these policies, think about someone like Amy Coney Barrett, who, for folks who are the youngest age of voters, this person could be on the court for our entire lives, or for half of our life, for to a certain extent. I'm thinking about just reflecting back on the fact that I was born in the middle of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's confirmation hearing. So literally my entire life so far had been with her tenure on the court. That's a 27 years that person was on the Supreme Court. It's a really long time. And so just thinking about, that and just sort of extrapolating that to so many other areas of government, you have so much at stake as the youngest cohort of voters. And the way I got involved in politics is, in so many instances, myself seeing problems, seeing a vacuum of leadership, seeing sort of a need for someone to get in the middle of that and to advocate for our community. And I just decided that person was going to be me. There wasn't anyone out there who was going to do it if I didn't do it. And so I'd encourage folks to take a look at what's going on in their community around them and see where they can plug themselves in. Don't wait for an invitation. Don't wait to be asked. You're going to have to invite yourself. So that would be my greatest hope for all young people who are looking to be involved in politics.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Horton. Best of luck for the campaign, the election. Yeah, we wish you luck.